It's my pleasure to be with you tonight, and you can see I'm waving a Canadian flag. This speech is dedicated to Canada Day, Black Lives Matter, and National Indigenous History Month. I'm confident that all of you are proud to be Canadian. Now, I have gallery view on right now, so I can see all of you. If you are proud to be Canadian, wave your hands. Okay, one person's not proud. Okay, similar to all individuals and countries, we have many wonderful characteristics and some dark moments in Canadian history. Fellow Toastmasters and welcome guests, following are some interesting facts about our country that we can celebrate. Number one, people from many parts of the world make Canada their new home. They bring their perspectives and their talents. Number two, Peterborough, Ontario is the canoe capital of the world. Number three, 15,500 of the world's 25,000 polar bears live in Canada. Canada has more lakes than all other countries in the world combined. 250,000 in Ontario alone. Number five, did you know that all letters to Santa end up in Canada? And volunteers reply in over 200 languages. Number six, Canada's literacy rate is over 99%. Number seven, Canadian inventions include basketball, the electric wheelchair, the baseball glove, insulin, and believe it or not, Hawaiian pizza, among many others. And finally, number eight, we have an armed forces that will fight when they have to. However, their primary goal is not to kill, but to maintain peace. My question before I continue is, what does Canada mean to you? I invite you to think about this. Message me after this speech. I will share the results with all of you at a future date. Turning now to the dark side of Canada, and that is our treatment of our Indigenous peoples. From Confederation to today, we deserve an E grade. In Canada, Indigenous people include First Nations, the Métis, as well as the Inuit. There are more than 630 First Nation communities in Canada, which represent more than 50 nations and 50 Indigenous languages. In 1870, the first Europeans arrived, and when they did, in this part of the world, the so-called Indians lived in all parts of what we now know as Canada. They were considered by these invaders, by the way, to be nothing but savages. John A. Macdonald, our first prime minister, was nothing short of a blatant racist. Here are two quotes from Macdonald. The first one, "I have reason to believe that the agents as a whole are doing all they can by refusing food until the Indians are on the verge of starvation in order to reduce the expense." Number two, he also said this, "When the school is on the reserve, the child lives with his parents who are savages. He is surrounded by savages. He is simply a savage who can read and write." Shocking, isn't it? Since Confederation, we have followed a policy of eliminating First Nations by starvation, segregation, and withholding of civil rights. To me, this represents the darkest characteristic of the human species. No other form of life that I know of turns on itself like humans do. The first Canadian government, and many following, perpetuated these policies against our Indigenous people. We put them on reservations and told them they could not vote in elections unless they gave up their beliefs and their way of life. But perhaps the cruelest thing we ever did was a campaign of residential schools. Some of you aren't aware of this. The policy was described as, quote, "to kill the Indian in the child," unquote. The premise was that if we took all the Indian children, put them in boarding schools under terrible conditions, all with the same haircuts to eliminate individuality, teach them our English and French cultures. In several generations, we could wipe out their inferior culture for good. Now, fellow Toastmasters and guests, does that seem to be a flawed plan to you? The RCMP and other forces actually kidnapped Indigenous children without the parents knowing and put them in these residential schools for years. More shocking, the mortality rate was as high as 60%, or estimated at 150,000 children. The initial terrible objective of our governments was not achieved, likely due to it being an abhorrent idea in the first place. The last residential school was only closed in 1996. This went on for over 100 years. Now, we as a country are now acknowledging at some level that this polity was just as heinous as a slave trade in the United States. In spite of our recent attempts of reconciliation with Native peoples, we have to recognize that Native peoples represent 5% of our population, while at the same time account for 25% of our incarcerated adults. More than 25% of Indigenous people live in poverty, while only 9.5% of the entire Canadian population do so. More than 3,000 Indigenous homes do not have running water. I don't know about you, but to me, in a country as rich as Canada, this is outrageous. Finally, suicide rates today of Inuit youth are among the highest in the world, at 11 times the national average. Disgraceful. In closing, a call to action. Let us all celebrate our country by all means. We've got a lot going for us. At the same time, we should all advocate for those less fortunate than us. It is so easy to be a spectator. We can participate in peaceful protests. We can contribute money to worthy charities. We can petition and hold accountable our elected officials. We can run for office ourselves. And we can fight to reduce racism. Question, when we sing our national anthem, "We stand on guard for thee," who is actually included? My fellow Canadians, we can and we must do better. Thank you.